on this computer. Beautiful. Should be recording. Okay. So, part 1, nature-based solutions science. Moving. There we go. So just an overview of today's webinar. You made it. We're here. That's great. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I'm going to do a brief series overview. So this webinar series, what it entails, and a bit of a Youth for Nature introduction for those of you who aren't familiar with this. And then we're going to move into part 1 with Dr. Bronson Griscom. We're so thankful for him to be leading this webinar, and I'm really excited to hear what he's going to be introducing and the science that he's explaining. Part 2 will be natural climate solutions and youth engagement with our regional coordinator for the Africa region, Paul. And then the final bit will be questions and next steps from us, detailing the following 2 webinars after this. Just a note on questions. If you have a short question or a request for clarification, please write it in the chat and I will try and get that answered as soon as possible. If it's more of an in-depth question or a question on concepts, if you could please hold it until our question period at the end, that would be very appreciated, just to not interrupt the flow. So, moving forward, Youth for Nature, who are we? We are a youth-led initiative mobilizing other young people to advocate for nature-based solutions, both locally and internationally. We stand for 3 key things. Knowledge sharing, so that would be these webinars here. We've hosted a series of webinars prior to this, and they're all available on our website, as also resource banks and toolkits. Storytelling. So we do this through social media and our digital story map. We've actually collected over 85 individual stories from 35 countries around the world, just over the span of a couple of months. And we're continuing to accept more stories from youth around the world who are working for nature and for climate. And we try and give them a platform for their voices to both share their work that they're doing and the work that their community is doing and try and foster a land stewardship movement. We also do this through on-the-ground exhibitions. So we were just in New York at New York Climate Week, and we were able to share our 3-day storytelling exhibition at the Nature's Climate Hub with close to 1,000 people, which was absolutely wonderful to get that many people engaged on youth stories and youth engagement. It was fantastic. And our final pillar is capacity building. So we do this through delegations to different conferences around the world. So we try and get youth involved in policy and really involved through active learning. So we bring delegations to certain countries around the world, and we're trying to share that with as many people as possible. So like I said, we were just in New York at New York Climate Week and at the United Nations Secretary General's Climate Summit. And we will be going to COP25, which is the point of these webinars here. So our mission is threefold. We want to see nature-based solutions account for 30% of all solutions to the climate crisis. This year, you will hear more about later. Very exciting. Secondly, we want to raise the voice of other youth by giving them a platform, which feeds into our storytelling. And third, we want to build the capacity of other young leaders to foster more nature and climate champions, which feeds into our third pillar, capacity building. So, this is a handy figure of all of our current core Youth for Nature members. We mobilize youth to advocate for nature-based solutions globally. As you can see by the demographic on this webinar right now, we have people from all different time zones. And it's really appreciated for those of you who might not be a very convenient time zone that you're making this webinar right now. Sorry, if everyone could please mute themselves. Aha, I did it. All right, so moving forward, like I said, these are where all of our core Youth for Nature members are currently residing. We try and have regional representation as far as we can. These are everyone who works on our team and goes to our delegations. If we were to include our larger membership, so our partner organizations, other engaged youth, our audience, and our regional storytellers, we would have probably more than 100 different spots on this map right here. And it's amazing to see what we could do in such a short amount of time As most of you may know, we launched very recently. We launched officially, I believe, in May 2019, so this year. In the short 6 months, less than 6 months since more than 6 months since we've been launched, we've been able to do all of this, which is absolutely wonderful. And I think it's a real testament to the power of youth and youth engagement. And we're very excited to keep going and see how much further we can push this. So moving forward, I just want to give a bit of a brief overview, not too much because I'm not the expert on this panel right now. A brief overview of nature-based solutions, just for those of you who may be joining us to get more of an in-depth understanding of them. So nature-based solutions and natural climate solutions will be used, not interchangeably, but they will both be used on this webinar. And I just want to make sure that we have an understanding of both of those terms. Nature-based solutions operate at the intersection between climate change and biodiversity loss. And I have the IUCN definition here. The IUCN defines nature-based solutions as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So nature-based solutions can thereby provide meaningful solutions to both our climate crisis and ecological crisis. Natural climate solutions, however, specifically address climate change. So nature-based solutions are kind of the umbrella term where natural climate solutions fall underneath. I hope that clears up some terminology there. We'll keep going. So to give you an overview of this webinar series, you've made it to the first one, thank you. This one will focus on the nature-based solutions science and natural climate solutions science. The following one will occur next Wednesday around the same time, nature-based solutions policy, sorry. And that one will be sharing experience from other youth organizations, as well as researchers from Wageningen University, as well as 4SD and Instituto Socioambiental. I do not speak other languages very well, so I apologize for butchering that. And our third webinar is to be announced. We're excited to be building off of the knowledge base that we are growing right now for the first webinar and the second webinar. And for the third webinar, we're trying to target the areas that maybe weren't covered and kind of build both of the first webinar and the second webinar together to create a really good knowledge base and final webinar before COP. And so most of you know, COP is December 2nd to 13th in Madrid. And we are really hoping that with this webinar series, we can build a knowledge base for both people to understand COP and to help youth understand the process, but as well to be building a stewardship movement for nature-based solutions and to really give a knowledge base for those who are maybe attending the conference, a foundational knowledge base to build off of and to bring forward into the conference so that we can all fight for nature-based solutions because they are critically important. So just a brief overview of COP25, and then I will let the experts take it away. So COP25. So key themes and initiatives by the COP25 presidency include renewable energy, circular economy, electric mobility, mitigation, adaptation, oceans, cities, ecosystems, Antarctica, water, and biodiversity. So as you can probably understand, nature-based solutions feed into many of these themes. There is a drive to enhance nationally determined contributions. Parties have to update their NDCs by the end of 2020, reviewed every 5 years, and so there is a large push for radical and effective change to be put into policy now, as in 5 years. We are not sure of what the landscape will look like at that point, and we need to make effective change starting immediately. For more of an in-depth understanding of COP 101, if you'd like to call it that, we have resources on our Youth for Nature website, which is linked at the bottom of this slide. So if you need a bit of a foundational base for COP, we have provided that there, but it's best to not include that in this presentation as we're really focusing on the nature-based solutions science. So leading into this, I will briefly introduce our key speaker, Dr. Bronson Griscom from Conservation International, and then I will let him take it away. So thank you so much, Bronson, for being here on this webinar. Very, very, very appreciated, and we are so excited to hear what you are sharing today. Dr. Bronson Griscom is the Senior Director of Natural Climate Solutions at the Moore Center for Science at Conservation International. He was previously the Director of Forest Carbon Science at the Nature Conservancy, an AAS Fellow at the US Department of State through the Global Environment Facility, a postdoctoral fellow at the Cannon Valley Institute, and he has done his PhD at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, as well as his MSc at NYU. Dr. Bronson Griscom joined Conservation International in August of 2019. He leads the strategic development of natural climate solutions science across the organization, including a research agenda that will help deliver on CI's climate goals. He will work closely with a network of scientists and experts across divisions and in collaboration with some of the world's leading climate-focused institutions and global thought leaders. Bronson and his team will conduct transformative research on natural climate solutions, including their monitoring and evaluation against targets, and the design of strategies for their implementation. Natural climate solutions include actions to protect, restore, and improve the management of forests, agricultural lands, and wetlands while safeguarding biodiversity and food. So they're pretty magical. Prior to this role, Griscom served as Director of Forest Carbon Science at the Nature Conservancy, leading a research program to measure the climate benefits of international conservation programs and to improve the design of conservation strategies for maximum climate benefit. In this role, Dr. Griscom led the research team that published the landmark study of natural climate solutions in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, which is the foundational study that so many of us focus our nature-based solution science on. And I am so excited to be able to hear from the lead author on that study. Prior to joining the Nature Conservancy, Bronson coordinated a successful effort at the US Department of State as an AAS Fellow to make climate change funding available for forest climate initiatives through the Global Environment Facility. He completed a postdoc at the Cannon Valley Institute in West Virginia, studying restoration of high elevation Appalachian watersheds. He completed a PhD in tropical forest ecology from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies in 2003, and received an MSc from Newark University in plant genetics and conservation. So I will allow Dr. Griscom to take it away, and thank you in advance.
To unmute. Can you hear me?
I can. Can everyone else?
Well, Haley, thanks so much. It is an honor and really a thrill to present at your first webinar. Let's see, should I share my screen, or you, is that cool, or should you pan through? Oh, you're muted now, Haley.
Share your screen if possible. I have your slides loaded if needed.
Great. Okay, will do. So, coming through?
Yes, here we go.
Yeah, let's see. No, I just gotta do the, I think it's not full screen, right? I gotta do, what the heck? Ah, there it is. All right, should be full screen now, is that right?
Yes.
Excellent, okay. Thanks so much. A thrill, as I said, and an honor. And I'm very excited that despite the time zones and the early mornings and evenings, you all have joined. So I can give you a little overview of natural climate solutions. So, you know, this topic I think is often, frankly, depressing, and for good reason. It is the greatest global environmental crisis in human history. But I want to start out with one of the basic reasons that I'm optimistic, and there's just a tremendous amount to be hopeful for. So this is a concept that I haven't heard talked about too much, but it's a concept called peak land. And the basic question is this: at what point will we hit a high watermark in the human footprint on the Earth? And so there have been some studies that have looked at this question, and this is the best known one that I'm aware of, is published in 2012. And the basic finding is that we're right about there. We're right about at what would be considered the high sort of high watermark of the human footprint. Now, why is that? We know that population growth is continuing. However, human population growth is actually, the rate of growth is actually now declining, right? So, you know, more people are added to the planet every year. That's, you know, more demand for resources for every individual. However, essentially the demand for resources for every individual per individual is declining, right? Because of essentially efficiencies of, let's say, technology for agriculture and other forms of technology, and some trends in other things like behavior. There are lots of different factors that play in here. For example, in developing countries, as people get wealthier, they tend to eat more meat, and, you know, higher meat diets have a bigger impact, you know, require more land, et cetera. However, like I said, there's technologies in agriculture which are improving the efficiency of production and reverse that. So you put all that together, and this prediction is that we're actually right about at peak land consumption globally. And if we do an even better job, right, if we you know, improve our practices, have healthier diets with lower meat consumption, developed countries, et cetera, we can actually drive down that footprint more rapidly. So this is a big deal. I mean, the human footprint on the planet has been increasing for like hundreds of years. And it seems to be that we are at a threshold basically for the first time in human history, where we're sort of crossing a threshold to a regreening and a restoration of the earth, because of these macro trends. So there's reason to be tremendously hopeful. Of course, there's a but. There is a fly in the ointment. Okay, and you may or may not have seen this type of graph before, but this is a graph showing the relationship between CO2 concentration in the atmosphere and global temperatures, using data like ice cores and other information that can allow us to understand. So, needless to say, these two lines are strongly correlated. And they're not just correlated, but we know it's actually pretty simple kind of atmospheric chemistry to know that CO2 and other greenhouse gases function as essentially a warming blanket of atmosphere on the Earth. They it's just like a blanket. It holds warmth, you know, and radiation, you know, that coming from the sun, and as it reflects back, it sort of holds that in the inside the sort of the envelope of the biosphere. And so what we see is this spike in CO2, clearly a function of human driven emissions, and we can anticipate a dramatic, you know, an increase in temperature. So this is a problem for all sorts of reasons. You know, we hear about it all the time. We know we cannot assign individual extreme weather events to climate change, but we do know that the probability of those weather events has significantly, the extreme weather events has significantly increased, whether it be hurricanes, fires, droughts, floods, all this stuff. I don't want to focus on this. You guys, I think, have already heard about this. You read it in the news, and perhaps others will cover this more. The intent of this is to focus on the solution set, right? What do we do about it? Okay, so most of the conversation around climate change and solutions to climate change are focused on exciting technologies. And I have to tell you, that's, despite being a forest ecologist by training, I get really excited by technologies. We just signed up for solar panels on our roof, which my 3 little daughters are totally excited about, because they're sort of even more, they're 6, 8, and 8, and they're even more sort of excited climate warrioresses than I think even I am. And I have to admit, one of the things I'm more excited about is trying to convince my wife, who is a little bit more rational about finances than I am, that we should buy a Tesla. Not, of course, for its tremendous acceleration in performance, but because of environmental impact, it's much lower. But jokes aside, these kind of technologies are really transformative, and we have to invest in a whole range of technologies and behavior changes to drive down fossil fuel emissions. The humbling part of this story is that massive adoption of these sorts of technologies and behavior changes to reduce emissions are no longer enough. We've sort of passed that point where we can just reduce emissions. What we've heard from various studies and synthesized by the latest report by the IPCC, the so-called 1.5 degree report, is that we need a third type of technology. And this is often referred to as negative emissions technology. So what does this mean? Ideally, what this technology would deliver is it needs to remove carbon from the atmosphere at massive levels. And given that we don't want to just, yet again, the history of environmentalism is sort of like, sort of trying to solve a problem by removing a pollutant from one place and sort of putting it somewhere else. Like you think of smokestacks, right? Like, oh, we have pollution, at ground air level, let's put smokestack and put it up in the atmosphere. So one of the problems with this technology is we can't just like dump massive amounts of CO2 in a place that might cause another problem. So ideally we'd actually be able to store all this sort of carbon pollution in useful materials, such as, let's just say, a carbon nanotubule. Okay, so the technology for doing this, there are some very early prototypes. It is decades away from cost-effective applications at large global scales. And I'm not a specialist in that, but that's my understanding from from the body of work that folks do on that. However, there is one critical exception, and that is, of course, photosynthesis. Now, I think we've all learned about photosynthesis in high school. I think I might have fallen asleep during that class. Like, it seems incredibly boring, but it's not. It's an incredibly powerful phenomenon, and it is an already globally scaled form of climate warming reversal. It is photosynthesis removes CO2 from the atmosphere, turns it into cellulose and other parts of plants. So CO2 is plant food, which leads us to the question: how much can this fundamental biological process contribute to the solution of climate change? Now, there have been a number of studies, over the years on this question, but what we were surprised to find is that there had not been what we thought was a really good synthesis on this question. So we brought together, I guess it was back in about 2014, about 30 different scientists. I think one of them is on the line. I think I saw Chris Skyner, one of my colleagues, on the line. But we brought it together from this is when I was working at the Nature Conservancy, and we worked with about 15 different research institutes with 30 different scientists to ask this question and published this paper that Haley referred to in 2017 called Natural Climate Solutions. So that's where this term comes from. And I want to just interrupt the flow here for a moment with essentially alphabet soup, and Haley has actually already covered this quite well, so I can do this quickly. But just to point out that this term, natural climate solutions, refers specifically to climate mitigation, right? And we measure that with CO2 or other equivalent, other greenhouse gases, which we can translate sort of by conversion into the same so-called greenhouse gas effect into CO2 units, whether it's methane or nitrous oxides, or whatever. We can all refer to it as CO2e or CO2 equivalent. So we have one metric that we can use to quantify natural climate solutions. there are various other types of climate concerns and societal concerns that are under the umbrella of this broader term called nature-based solutions. One of those other major dimensions is adaptation and resilience. So essentially, nature-based ways of responding and adapting to climate change and being more resilient to it. Those other things involve a variety of other metrics, and I want to point out that when we prioritize adaptation and resilience with nature-based solutions, it will often draw us to other types of strategies and other places to implement those strategies. That even if adaptation resilience activities are contributing to NCS, I just want to point out that's not all the same thing, because it matters what our priority is and what our fundamental metric is for an outcome. Okay. Oh yeah, and so EBA, by the way, that's one term, ecosystem-based adaptation, that's been used for this other category. Okay, so just to clarify, I think it's fine to use NCS and NBS interchangeably, but I want you all to understand that they're not the same thing. Okay, so, and again, before we dive into the results of our study, I want to just go over some real basic, like, carbon cycle 101. So photosynthesis removes carbon from the atmosphere. It turns it into plant matter, as I mentioned before. Some of that, especially in wetland systems where soil carbon just accumulates, some of that soil carbon, some of that carbon from plants, by virtue of leaves falling, by virtue of trees dying, essentially gets incorporated into the soil. Whenever you disturb an ecosystem, whether it's a forest or anything else, that a lot of that carbon will go back up into the atmosphere, whether that's through actually direct burning of that biomass, or just metabolism in the guts of little microbes, so decay. So, on the one hand, we've all learned about this in like high school biology class. On the other hand, like, it's worth stopping to just consider that plants eat air. Okay, they eat a substance that you cannot see, and it looks like they're growing out of the soil, like they're getting their mass from the soil, but they're not. They're getting the mass of the material in a plant, the wood in a tree, that is coming from a gas in the air, and which is primarily CO2. So it's for this reason that plants on Earth are the primary driver of the carbon cycle on Earth. And in fact, it is the fossilized plants in the form of fossil fuels, which are, again, the cause of this whole issue that we have now, which is the sort of burning of fossil fuels. Actually, initially, it was the burning of forests and other landscapes, which dumped a bunch of carbon in the atmosphere for agriculture, and now it's more driven by fossil fuel emissions. But it's all about, one way or another, whether it's current plants or fossilized plants, it's all about plants. Okay, so returning to this question, this is the main, essentially, summary figure of our study. What we did is we unpackaged all the different types of activities that we could do that would essentially either protect ecosystems or restore ecosystems in some way. Either sort of reduce the ongoing emissions from human disturbance of systems or reverse those. And so here are the 20 different set of options we found. I won't have time to go into every single one of these, but there are a set of options around forests, a set of options around agricultural landscapes and native grasslands, and a set of options around wetlands. The first thing we did is we looked at the maximum mitigation potential, and that is the farthest right-hand point of each of these bars. And we did constrain that by, we said, hey, we're not really interested in the maximum if you sort of, if all humans disappear, we still have to feed ourselves, and we still have to put roofs over our head. So this is with safeguards that we said, okay, we have to be able to provide sufficient food and wood fiber, and we cannot kind of have competition with native biodiversity. So we shouldn't be like planting eucalyptus, you know, in an African savanna, for example. So with those constraints, we constructed those maximum mitigation potential for each of these options. And then we asked two further questions. How much of that, so what proportion of that bar can be delivered at $100 per ton of CO2 and at $10 per ton of CO2? So the $100 threshold, I'm sorry, at or below, so primarily below. So if we're willing to spend up to $100 or less, how much can we deliver? That's the light gray bar. If we're willing to spend up to or less than $10, that's the dark gray portion of these bars. And as you can see, of course, depending upon each of these options, there are sort of different levels of the proportions of the total that can be sort of cost effectively or at low cost delivered. Okay, so then stepping back to our broad question that we started with, what is the sort of the magnitude of contribution to global climate change? So if we add all of those gray bars in that last slide, and that's that $100 upper threshold, what we find is that that adds up to about 11 billion tons of CO2 mitigation, either avoided emission or increased storage per year. And if we give ourselves about a decade to ramp up to that, that level, and then we look at the total amount of climate mitigation needed between now and 2030, and this was again back in 2017, this whole body of natural climate solutions would deliver actually between 2017, 2016, and 2030, that was about 37% of the total potential. As you move out from there, the proportional contribution of NCS declines simply because the business as usual emissions from fossil fuels keeps going up. And so the amount of fossil fuel mitigation you need sort of just goes up with that. So in a sense, the natural climate solution story is huge, whether it's 37% or 30% or 20% or even 10%, it's a major contribution, but it's particularly critical in the near term because it's an existing technology that we can globally scale right away. By the way, I think I didn't mention sort of why the rationale for $100, why the $100 threshold. Well, this is something called the social cost of carbon. The idea is that looking forward, what economists tell us is that for every ton of carbon, of CO2 in the atmosphere, we expect the cost to society to be probably more than $100 per ton of CO2, right? So the cost from all these extreme weather events, from sea level rise, et cetera, et cetera. And so what that means is, if we were purely rational creatures, we would be willing to spend at least up to $100 to avoid that greater cost, okay? So it's just a pure kind of sort of cost rational level of investment in natural climate solutions and other forms of climate mitigation. So that's where we come up with a $100 threshold. The $10 threshold is simply to recognize that, well, we're not yet essentially rational in that sense, but we're willing to spend about 10 or actually increasingly more. So that's where those two levels are from. Okay, so that's great. So that's how the basic unpackaging of these numbers. But now to this sort of what I call the secret sauce of natural climate solutions. I've added in now these the review we did of these other benefits. We weren't able to quantify them as explicitly as we did for carbon, but we did tally the set of other benefits that are associated with each of these types of actions. And there are a whole bunch of them, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that natural ecosystems and managed ecosystems do for us, whether it's filtering air, providing habitat for biodiversity, filtering our water, flood control, soil fertility, etc. And you can see that a number of these options provide multiple of those. We at environmental organizations like Conservation International and the Nature Conservancy and elsewhere, we'll tend to focus on those options which provide the largest number of other benefits. So I want to just focus the eye for a moment on some of those options. Okay, so this is just some graphical depiction of a number of these economic, environmental, and social benefits, which we haven't actually accounted for in considering those cost thresholds. So that's one reason we think that our estimates are actually conservative, because once you consider these additional benefits, there's actually a good reason that NCS should contribute more than a third or 30% of global climate mitigation. Okay, so that's really the overview of the big picture. And now I want to focus in, sort of dive into some more specific points. The first point is really, it's more of a communications point. That, one of the questions I encounter is, why is it that we don't hear more? I mean, I think recently we have heard more, but as of a couple of years ago, we really didn't hear much about natural climate solutions. And here's an example. In 2016, this is a New York Times article talking about sort of the infighting within the environmental community around different climate mitigation options, whether it's, they're saying, well, the environmental community cannot agree on whether, what about windmills? Well, they kill birds. What about nuclear energy? Well, how do you store this, the radioactive waste? They go on sort of how sort of divisive this issue is. And nowhere in the article were natural climate solutions even mentioned. And this is common, right? In the media, they often it's just ignored as a major solution. And so I think this is a plea to all of us that we might have a lot of trouble agreeing on, as an environmental community, right? On agreeing on lots of these climate mitigation solutions. There are difficult choices and trade-offs. But I think that in the case of natural climate solutions, like, it's kind of a no-brainer. Like, there are lots of challenging things involved in these set of solutions, especially locally. But if we do it right and we think about those social and cultural considerations, many of these things really, I don't think should be controversial. That's an opinion. Okay, so now driving in on what, we've talked about the overall picture, and thinking a little bit more about sort of how do we actually, sort of the how. So how do we actually implement this stuff? I listed 20 different options, and we don't have time to cover those in any granular detail, but we can sort of unpackage one layer down, right? Which is that there are three major types of actions involving natural climate solutions. One of them is various forms of protection of ecosystems. The other is some form of improved management of working landscapes, okay? Working landscapes now represent actually more than half of ice-free land on Earth. And so so we have to engage best practices while still producing food and fiber from the so-called working landscapes. And then when we can also actually essentially rewild, we can bring back native ecosystems and expand them in places where there's sort of the least competition for production of the things that we need. We've had a number of new data sets come out since we published this paper. Here's flagging two of them, a study by Jonah Bush et al. Two of them that I happen to have been involved with, so I guess a little bias here in presenting these two, showing essentially the best available look at the sort of cost constraints to reforestation, and showing essentially where we think the best reforestation opportunities occur in the tropics. Another study led by my colleague Peter Ellis, looking at reduced impact logging. So we can, without reducing the production of timber, and wood is actually a low carbon form of structural material, so we probably don't want to reduce the production of timber, but we can do much lower impact forms of harvesting of wood, and essentially while protecting and actually restoring native forests. And I'm going to whip through the last couple of slides here, so there's time for the remaining questions and presentations. And so this is basically an update, a new paper we have coming out soon, an update of the total mitigation potential in the tropics for the priority pathways that I'd mentioned earlier that have a whole bunch of these other co-benefits. Here's just a flash of some of the sort of geographic distribution of the major types of NCS. So depending on what country you are, and this gets back to Haley's point about, about the upcoming a UN Conference of the Parties on the climate, annual climate gathering, is that when countries are thinking about what each country can do to mitigate climate change using natural climate solutions, well, the answer depends a lot on where you are. In some places, the set of options are primarily going to be dominated by some form of protection. In other places, various forms of restoration and improved management of working lands as discussed. And this is just an attempt to map out where those primary options are. And finally, driving down just to list out some of the countries that we see are of particular interest for natural climate solutions. So on the horizontal axis here is the total climate mitigation potential from natural climate solutions of various sorts, broken out by country. And what you see is that, there's a reason why we often hear about Brazil and Indonesia and DRC and India and some of these countries that have just really a massive potential for natural climate solutions. But I actually don't want to focus on that for the moment. I want to also focus on this question about the NCS as a proportion of national GHG emissions. So we know that all countries essentially need to get to carbon neutrality by about the middle of the century. And so we ask the question, how much can NCS in each country deliver on that goal of carbon neutrality? And the answer is that there are a bunch of countries in which that countries can not only get to zero, to sort of a net zero emissions, but they can go way beyond that. These are a number of countries here listed that can actually become significantly carbon negative and contribute to global ambition on climate mitigation. And so these are reasons why a lot of these countries should receive international funding, not only for sort of philanthropic reasons, but because these countries are positioned to deliver beyond their own sort of carbon neutrality. And we should be, I think, encouraging international funding to help these countries do this. And I think we're going to hear from somebody from Kenya, I believe it is. And you can see here that Kenya is one of these countries that can go way beyond carbon neutrality through a variety of interesting natural climate solutions. I don't think there'll be time, but there's one, I just want to, toss out there some examples. And there's one example of an indigenous group we're working with in Suriname to both protect and implement low impact forestry methods for essentially a form of green development. Final point. We have to crowdsource this, right? I mean, the people that control and manage the lands of the earth are, it is a vast number of individuals. This is not just about big corporations. We do have to change the behavior of big corporations, but this is about all of the people all over the world who are making decisions about how to manage our lands, whether it's individual farmers, ranchers, communities, all over the place. So there are our climate heroes of the future are everywhere. Thanks very much. Back to you, Haley. You're on mute.
Always on mute, apparently. Thank you so much, Bronson, for that. That was really, really wonderful to see. I love the way that you speak about science. As someone with a science background myself, it's really nice to hear someone geek out a little bit. So I really appreciate it, and thank you for being so engaging. We will, just a note on time, we will run over a little bit. For those of you who were only able to make the first hour, thank you very much. We are recording, so this will be published on our website if you'd like to catch up if you do have to leave. But I do want to give enough time to Paul, who is our next speaker, and for questions at the end. So we will run a little bit over. Apologies for being late. Okay, so Paul, it's up to you now. Just give me 1 second. I will screen share myself. Here we go. Wrong one. There we go. Okay, so can everyone see this? Oops. Oh. Yes, okay.
Yes.
Great. I realized you're the only one not on mute, Bronson. Okay. Oh, my dogs go. There they are. All right. And I'm just going to give a brief overview of Paul, and then Paul can take it away. And then we'll have a short section for questions. So this is a picture of our lovely Paul, who will speak in just a moment. He is the regional coordinator for Youth for Nature for the Africa region, and he is also the youth ambassador for SDG 7 in Kenya. I'm just pulling up the chat right now. Okay. He previously was the communications and programs lead for 350.org Kenya and AYICC Kenya. He was also an environmental educator at Arusha, Kenya, and he is the founder and the head writer at Green Treasures Farms. He will speak to his experience with forest restoration and climate smart agriculture in Kenya. Paul, if you can take it away, that would be great. Are you able to share your screen?
Hello, thank you so much, Haley, for that. Hope everyone can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay, sure. Just a moment to share my screen. A moment, please. Yeah. Okay, good. Yes, thank you for the introduction, and to Bronson for that very interactive session. It was a real one-on-one for me and NCA, so thank you so much. Let's introduce Paul Mutuku, and I'm going to take us through science and youth inclusion on nature-based solutions. I'm from Kenya, and I'm basing this out of my experience and my background in environmental science and everything. And maybe to just give you a bit of an education background about me, happened to study environmental conservation and natural resource management from the University of Nairobi. So what this did is that it really trained me more about practical skills on environmental protection and the science of conservation at a young age. But it did not only do that to me, it also went notch higher to actually equip me with more natural resource management skills. And for me, I think this is what our education systems need to do to young people and to the current generation. Why is it important? It's important because the young people of this century are faced with two existential threats. One of them is climate crisis. The other one is ecological crisis. So then if we're not equipped with some of these key environmental causes in our life, then I don't think then we stand a chance to fight climate crisis and ecological crisis. So then I think we need to engage more about this. And so what I'm going to do, I'm not going to talk more about what I do at Green Treasures Farms or those for my engagements, or even more about the science of nature-based solutions, because Bronson has really done a good job taking us through. But I'm going to just highlight some of the key things that we are engaging in Kenya. around natural climate solutions and some of the nature-based solutions that young people are already taking in terms of agriculture, forestry, and all that. And the first one is more about awareness creation. And in Kenya, there's a growing trend of environmental education. Now, what this has done in the country is that with the ambition to at least achieve the 10% forest cover by 2020 now, I think young people are now coming up to train each other and train young people about, about the essence of nature and tree growing culture, and then protecting the environment, not just for our own sake, but for nature itself and future generations. So in Kenya, then there's a big opportunity. It's already being explored by young people across the country to educate their peers and the community about environmental education. So that's one of the key intervention areas that we are really engaging on. The next point is more about community exchange forums or dialogues on natural resources. Now in Kenya, I think we lie around the equator and everything. So it's a tropical region. Then there's a myriad of ecosystem that surround us. So then, with resources, I think it's pretty clear that we are bound to have conflicts, of course, because people want to have more ownership of resources and everything. But then for us, young people are already exposed to the science of natural resources management and conservation. Then we take it upon ourselves to actually engage communities and also our leaders on these community exchange forums, create awareness and train people about how to coexist with nature, but also make maximum use of the natural resources around them, not hurting others and everything. So the picture you see to my left, that is actually dead log. See, there's a lot of moss covering it and all that. And these are some of the things that we use in our environmental education sessions to actually introduce young people to all these different aspects about nature and everything, and why we need to conserve everything. And so far, it's really proven to be a very effective tool to especially offer this environmental education series to kids and also young adults, because I think they more learn through experiential exposures in the field and all that. The middle picture shows one of our very iconic species that is common in Africa. It's called Abugia ugandensis, and it's a very rich and key medicinal tree that we've embraced and we've tried to talk and educate communities about. Now, a very important aspect about this tree is that it's hugely used as a medicinal tree across East Africa. So if you suffer, from toothache and any kind of body ache, then this will be the tree to run to and get your toothache or any body ache, or solve and everything. So these are some of the things that I'm telling people that engage in growing of these indigenous trees in areas that they were grown and everything, and then you're going to restore nature to what it was and all that. The picture to my right speaks more about research and everything. So even as we engage community and train on environmental education and everything, then we try to want them to experience nature and everything. So I think there's a flower, some sort of leaves and a bit or a beetle and everything. So we try to show people the interaction and how complex nature can be. And this is a very simple way of trying to educate people about the essence of conservation and what nature is made about and all that, so that then it will be easier for them to understand what nature-based solutions initiatives look like and everything. Going on next, I'm going to go on my second point, on-ground projects. So again, we've been working around highlighting some of the main projects that young people are doing across the world. And this has been very important, so much so for Youth for Nature, like Kelly already mentioned. I had the privilege to share some of these stories that young people have been engaging on at the global stage in New York. And so these are some of the things also engaged actually on in Kenya. And one of them is actually on ecological farming, where most people are now turning into chemical-free farming methods and everything. Having young people already starting social enterprises to train people, setting up training centers on ecological farming and everything, and also running their own, ecological farms and supplying organic food to the market and everything. Now, what that does is that it not only gives you healthy food and everything, but then it also helps improve your soil. And so to me, I think it's part of what we call soil regeneration and everything, and it goes a long way towards, protecting the whole integrity of soil and, enhancing the carbon sequestration around crop fields and all that. So that's a very key one around us. And the other one is about forest conservation. And like I mentioned before, Kenya is very key, on reforestation and proforestation in Kenya. And so far, I think our ambition to attain the 10% forest cover by 2030 has already been ambitious, and we're actually about to attain it come next year in the 2020. And it's because now it's become culture and part and parcel of everyone to actually want to grow trees and live in very serene environments and take, the community back to where it was before and have those serene environments surrounding them and everything. Thing is, with Africa, we already know that climate change is real. And our main issue around the natural climate solution is the fact that land restoration really needs to be the very key driver towards our climate adaptation and mitigation. Now, you should note that around 65% of the African land is already facing degradation. Now, this translates to about 75.3 million hectares and all that. So now what is happening in Africa is that we have a Free 100, an initiative that has come up already, and we're trying to mobilize over 22 African countries to come together and restore degraded land and deforested forest to a tune of around 100 million hectares. And it's a very big ambition for Africa, but it's already started, and already we are seeing lots of improvement and everything. We also have the Great Green Wall, which is another ambitious plan for Africa to actually reforest, like create that big green wall across sub-Saharan Africa and everything. The aim being, to help, provide some of these climate solutions to the sub-Saharan part of Africa and all that, and so contribute towards, the overall climate solutions to the world. Next, again, these are some of the projects, like I said, that are taking place in Kenya. The one to my left shows a bit of what we call the multi-story farming methodology. And this is already being practiced by a lady called Mercy Kamonjo in some of the dry parts of Kenya called Kajiado. So what she's doing is she's actually using the science that she's gained from the school to engage the community around there, most of who are really pastoralists, and we know that pastoral communities are also contributing much towards climate change and everything. So then she's trying to offer more alternatives to these communities and just diversify their way of living and how they actually access food and other resources. So then organic farming through the multi-story structures really becomes an intervention. And not only does it do that, then it actually helps improve on soil fertility and create more humus, which will really then help in the soil regeneration. And these are very simple yet very impactful, solutions to our climate and everything. To my right, this is a lady who's actually been practicing organic farming. She's from Kenya, but she's doing this organic farming on the border of Tanzania and Kenya. Now, Julian is a business student at Kenyatta University, one of the big universities in Kenya. And she's joined a group of fellow young women and men who are now investing in ecological farming in the country and trying to supply organic and chemical-free produce to the market and everything. Now, they only don't do that, but they also engage in several environmental conservation measures like tree growing and training communities about soil care and intercropping with natural means and everything. And this has really gone a long way towards reclaiming some of the otherwise called wastelands and everything, but also giving more clean and healthy food to the community. And I think it's a big area that we need intervention around and everything. Now, after all this, I think then we beg to ask the question that what is the way for young people? Now, I think it's pretty crystal clear that resources that are in favor of young people as I've related, like we have the time, we have energy, we got creativity and passion, to engage in some of these so-called natural climate solutions. And we also have the power to build movements, and we've already seen with the global climate strikes and everything. This is a very key thing that I think the young people can engage and show the world that we care about the planet. We might not have the experience, but we have the will to actually want to learn more, but also take, more leadership about climate solutions and everything. Now, the thing that we are lacking is actually some good experience that we need from experts, and I'm happy that this through the Youth for Nature webinars, then we actually get to be connected to experts like Bronson, who's really giving us a wealth of information and resources that we can, take to the ground and implement. I think we also need exposure to opportunities, which again, Youth for Nature has really championed for so long. And I think if we trust young people with leadership and with, implementation of some of these projects, then I think then the world starts to be amazed, because, we already have the youth badge, and there are so many of us that if we're empowered enough and given the right opportunities, then young people are just about to surprise the world and everything. The other gap that I think it's also crucial is on resources. And here we not only mean finances and all that, we need the technical know-how, we need connection, we need some, office spaces and everything. People need some ground support and all that. So these are what we are saying. If we match them with the resources that young people already have, then we are really going to have big breakthroughs in nature-based solutions for humanity and for nature. Why? Because young people are not necessarily doing some of these interventions for pay, but they really want to ensure that we are taking care of the planet and actually leaving behind a better world than we found it. And I think this is where now global leadership needs to come in handy and support young people on what we are doing, because whether it's agriculture, whether it's on forestation and all that, whether it's on actually rehabilitating rivers and all these are very small interventions that really matter in the long run, and that's where we need to help each other, grow the movement. So finally, I think, as I say thank you to you, I just want to point out some very few issues that young people are ready to do the work. They're already doing the work on the ground, but we cannot do the work without the older community. We need the experience from the older members of the society in order for us to actually drive these natural climate solutions initiatives to total success and everything. Now, nature-based solutions implementation has always been a solution, but it's never been given much attention. I think statistics have it that in all the negotiations, it's only been spoken about 3% of the time that we know that it contributes to about 30% of the climate solutions. It received very few, or very low funding, but we need this to be improved. We need it to be spoken about very much so. And the fact that the UN is getting to the new UN decade on ecosystem restoration, then we should have more ambitious plans and more ambitious funding and more ambitious inclusion of young people to help us, drive these agendas to its full potentials. And from a science perspective, I know that with climate and ecological crisis, the growing world population will highly need healthy food and clean drinking water, which is why actually I founded Green Treasures Farms to empower young women and youth actually around organic food growing, about environmental conservation, but also showing them better ways of water harvesting and trying to live sustainably with nature and everything, just like what I've highlighted from my peers and what other young people are doing in Kenya. My parting note to you, I think today will be that we young people have the time, we have the energy, we have the creativity, and of course we have the passion. If we match this with the good experience from experts, we can hugely make nature-based solutions actions a big breakthrough for humanity and for nature. So then, with the youth, we deserve to take the leadership on these very issues, which entirely are about our future and about the future of the planet. With that, I really say thank you to you all. And if we take care of the environment, these are the beautiful pictures that we can see. These are the beautiful pictures that we can leave to our future generations and everything. So thank you so much, and I look forward to engaging with everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Your presentations are always so inspiring, so insightful. We really appreciate you sharing today. So I'm just going to briefly hop over back to the presentation, and then we'll open it up for questions. Here we go. Move this bar. There, okay. I'm going to unmute you all. I can figure out how to do this. There we go. Okay, I'll be unmuted right now. Please feel free to ask questions. I will pull this back up. Okay. There we are. Are there any questions for Dr. Griscom? Okay, for those of you, again,
Haley, I saw one
in the chat, right?
I think.
For those of you who are not actively asking a question,
Haley, I haven't heard a question yet, but just while waiting to answer to one of the chat questions about major actors, I think the simplest answer is that on the nature4climate.org website, that's nature, the number 4 climate.org, of which Nature Youth for Nature is a part of that. You know, it lists under the partners tab a bunch of the other actors. Obviously, Conservation International is where I work for, but a number of other partnering organizations, the Nature Conservancy, World Wildlife Fund, et cetera, are listed there. So just would refer you all to that resource.
yes, and I can also agree that Nature for Climate is a wonderful organization. They would probably be the best landing point for nature-based solutions, and like Dr. Griscom said, if you go to the resource section on their website, that is the best starting point to figure out who the other nature-based solutions actors are. I will include this link in the chat. Just 1 second. Oh, and now my internet is being wonky. All right. You're all able to unmute yourselves. If you'd like to ask a question, please just unmute yourself and ask it, or you're also welcome to type it in the chat. For Marina said, maybe we can put a plus in the chat if we have, which I think that would be great. Okay, Marina, you have a question. Hello.
Hi. I can even turn my video on, probably. Hi. Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Griscom. I was wondering, after looking at that graph that you showed, where we can see the potential for different countries in terms of how much nature can do to help them achieve carbon neutrality, and for a lot of countries it was past 100%, so that those countries can actually go carbon negative through nature. I was wondering how we can measure the impact of a particular natural climate solution once it's implemented. So like, what strategies can we use to sort of measure success? How do we know if it's working, basically?
Marina, you just exposed yourself as a serious accounting nerd. That is a great question, and that's like a big part of my job, is to try to answer that question. So the problem is it's hard for me to give you a short answer, but I will try to do that. So there's a big range. So for, we listed those 20 different types of actions, right? But in really simple terms, for the protection set of options, right? Let's just say forest, avoiding deforestation. That's actually one of the easiest things to monitor because we have satellites like Landsat. It's actually U.S. satellite that was launched like back in the 70s, and we have a long and very consistent history of satellite data that's freely available to everyone that will show essentially the extent of forest and the loss and actually regrowth in some places, but the ongoing loss in many places of those forests. And so in the simplest possible example, what we do is we take like a 10-year history period and look back and say, okay, in any given country, let's just say Kenya, we just heard about Kenya, looking at the history of loss, we get a rate of loss per year from that historic record. And then we say, okay, we have to push that down. We have to reduce that rate of loss. And and then we can just, and again, it's freely available data. So with this, essentially some quick calculations, we can just sort of track that either, that reduction, hopefully, in the rate of loss. When you get into other set of options, the improved management of landscapes, the monitoring and the science behind that it varies. For some of those agricultural pathways, it involves soil carbon, and that you really, in most cases, can't like directly measure that from space. So you need other systems of actually tracking that. And some of the most sophisticated options have been sort of methodologies around this verification systems have been built by voluntary carbon standards. So there's a standard that sort of the best of one that the best available one I'm aware of is called VERA, VERRA, and they have a series of so-called methodologies to track the changes in the avoided emissions or increased sinks for lots of different of these options. So that's probably if you really want to nerd out and dig into the details, you can go to Vera and look up different methodologies. By the way, Marina and to Caroline and Haley, I wanted to thank you so much. You all, of course, pulled this all together, and at least conversations I've had with you all to set this up. So thanks so much to you all.
That was super interesting. I'm definitely going to check that out. Thank you, and thank you for making the time to share your knowledge with us and everybody else that's on the call.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I did note that there was one participant who had their hand up, but going back through the participant list, it looks like they might have had to leave. So if it was you that had your hand up, if you could please unmute yourself and ask your question right now, I'll give you a few seconds. Otherwise, we'll continue.
Hello. My name is Lester Newton K. I'm from Kenya, and I am founder of Trees for Goals, which is an organization I began in 2018, where I decided that for every goal I score, I plant a tree. And this was in order to conserve the environment around me and also to inspire others to do the same. And it was because I started hearing things like deforestation and climate change. And so I decided that I want to do something about it, because I also knew that there were some heroes from my place, which is Kenya, like Wangari Maathai and many others, who told us stories about the importance of forests and the environment and why we should conserve it. My question is, I'm actually 15 years old. I'm still in high school. I'm in year 10. And it's just to know how I can translate this to my friends, and how I can make it simple for them, and why it's important for us young people, us teenagers, to know these things and care for the environment. So just generally for anyone to answer it. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. You're so young, and it's amazing to see that you're engaging with nature-based solutions and natural climate solutions. I'll pass the question on to Dr. Griscom or Paul. If either of you would like to respond, please take the floor.
Gosh, I certainly want to leave time for Paul to answer. I mean, I don't have any brilliant insights. The one thought I have is that one of the things just on a personal level, I mean, obviously there's a professional level question, right? Like, where does sort of the arc of each of our lives in terms of our careers, and so there's, you know, I'll sort of dodge that question because that's a very profound one, but obviously critical one. But on a very personal level, right? Like our day-to-day activities, one of the things I enjoy, I kind of also nerd out on a little bit, is you can go to these these carbon footprint calculators online. You can just like Google it. The Nature Conservancy has one, Conservation International has one. They're both of those are good examples. And you can plug in and you can sort of learn about like what parts of your own lifestyle have climate impacts. And then so then my own take on this is like, of all that you can sort of play with, like, oh, I can adjust my diet, I can adjust my, you know, the way I transport myself around, I can, you know, adjust this, that, and the other thing. And then think about like, which of those options for your own life is the most fun? Like, make it fun, because that's like, and, you know, make it something that, you know, maybe is, you know, more exercise, improve your health, like things that that you can make your life more enjoyable while reducing your impact. So that's just one thought.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, do you have anything to say to that?
Sure. I think the young man is actually doing a lot of good work. Yeah, I think you're really doing an amazing work in the country. And so far, we've actually, I think, is the one boy I've seen even in our national media being covered and everything. And I think that's really leadership for him. So it means that taking some action for environment means, you know, tying it to areas that you're passionate about. For him, it's actually football and scoring, you know, a match triggers him to grow trees and everything. So I think then that's like a beautiful little contribution that we can all be part of. Now, what I think I can tell you is that Youth for Nature is already there for you. And we got our socials on display. You can just also check out Youth for Nature online and then try to sign up, and we'll give you so much about how you can engage with us. And you'll actually also be referred to me to engage further about that. Again, I think it's also a chance for you to link up with young people around you and also try to understand issues now better. And also, you know, consult some experts in the field, and you know, on activities that we can engage more and also, you know, make more impact to you know, the causes that we are part of. So I think, I mean, congratulations on that, and I think we cannot go any lower. Let's just keep improving and working on what we are doing already. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, and make sure to check on the website.
Great. Are there any more questions?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Ibrahim Inusa from Nigeria. I'm not seated. I'm on the road actually. So I just want to, thank you all for all the amazing things you have been doing for the youth around the globe. Like Paul is an inspiration to me in Africa. I was inspired by his jobs and what he has been doing to promote nature-based solutions. I met him during the first webinar of Youth for Nature. So he was my mentor. I was inspired by him, and I want to thank him for the question he raised, and then how Youth for Nature are committed for taking the voices of the youth to the national decision making, as in high level decision making plan. So I think we youth are doing very amazing things down here, but yes, actually we need capacity building. We need you to build our capacities. Like me, I was in GLF Accra last month. So I went there, I was amazed by so many things that our young people doing around the world to protect our environment and our planet. So that's why, like, for my is as in me as an example, I run an organization. I was conceived by seeing that yes, calling for urgent action on the youth around the globe is the only thing that we can do to make the reality of the Paris conference. So I was conceived by an idea of coming together of young people by having an organization, Nature Conservation Advocates for Climate Initiative, whereby we advocate on the young people, especially the younger ones, the school children. We one day every Friday advocate on them the need to plant trees to conserve our nature. So we have been doing this, but yes, we are just volunteers. Like, it's only me. I'm just the one running the organization for now. So we need capacity building. We need our capacities to be built, and yeah, uh, we have so many talents around. We just need our capacity. And I'm apologizing for my speaking, as in I'm not comfortable speaking to the public actually. So I thank you all for being here, for nature and for our globe to have a sustainable future. We are hoping for our future generations. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ibrahim. I hope that I pronounced that correctly. I recognize your name. You engage with Youth for Nature a lot, and we really appreciate your continued engagement. And congratulations on speaking. I know that it can be difficult and a little nerve-wracking to speak in front of people. Me myself, or I myself, see, I already get nervous. We all have issues with public speaking, so it's really great to see you raise your voice. And I completely agree with you. Capacity building is probably the most important thing to do for youth engagement and the youth movement. There are so many interested and dedicated youth around the world, and it's a lack of resources and a lack of knowledge that often create the barriers for us to participate in more meaningful policy, more meaningful science, more meaningful engagement, whatever it is. And so I agree. There needs to be more capacity building. And as you are very engaged with Youth for Nature, you know what we're trying to do, and we always appreciate your continued support and your continued input. Just to keep moving us forward, I noted that there was one question written in the chat. My apologies, I do not want to butcher your name. If you could please ask your question regarding Indigenous agricultural landscapes. If you're speaking, we can't hear you. There you go. I've unmuted you. If you could ask your question.
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I already wrote my question from the chat box. Yeah, at the first presentation, I saw that the reforestation is the highest impact for the mitigation of climate change. So, what's the situation in Turkey? Is nowadays our government trying to plant trees everywhere, and these trees are mostly pine trees, and while they are trying to plant these trees, they are removing the high quality soil from the ground, and they are using machines for planting these trees. And after planting, lots of them are dying because it's not possible to survive for them because they need irrigation for being survived. Also, another issue that these pine trees is damaging the soil. Also, they are not recovering the soil, and they are not letting other plants to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And also the biodiversity is going less because this is not a forest. It's just like a agricultural area, like a tree farm or something like this. So, and also this is not connected with some local people who who are living there. So the locals couldn't get any income or couldn't get any connection with this kind of tree farms. I'm not calling them as a forest. So I don't believe the reforestation is a solution, and maybe lots of politicians or people just understand forest is the place that with the trees. So there is many complicated and mixed and complicated minds on this issue. So I don't believe that much. So I think we have to focus more who are living with harmony with the nature and more connected with Gaia. So there is many research like for holistic science researchers, like they are trying to discover how indigenous people succeed to live harmony with nature and more friendly with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just this can be a solution. I'm not sure, and I don't have enough knowledge. I just reading from books, and I just have chance to visit some indigenous agricultural landscape in Turkey, and these peoples, these locals are amazing because they are just doing very less things, not using machines or something. Just they're like following nature and monitoring more,
Mm-hmm.
and living with them in the harmony. So the question is to Dr. Griscom. Maybe did he heard any research on these issues, or did he heard any speech, any book, or I want to know more about his ideas on this topic.
Great, thank you so much. Great question. So what your question points to is the how, right? So how do you actually on the ground in a specific geography do any of these things, whether it's reforestation, I think we might need to do mute for some background. My answer is that you're absolutely right. The person with the question, that there are ways of doing, in quote, reforestation that can be perverse, they can be problematic. So in the case of putting pine trees, and I suspect these are sort of, the example might be a non-native tree being planted in an ecosystem. If they're dying, you know, they're not succeeding, that often means that they're not really the right tree for that landscape. Furthermore, we don't want to replace, you know, in some cases you can have native scrub, shrub, and savanna landscapes. You don't want to replace those with what actually could be a higher carbon system, like a eucalyptus plantation. So even if they do survive, if they are going in reverse in terms of biodiversity and you know, the local ecosystem, that is a problem. So it's very important to implement any of those set of 20 options I listed in ways that are positive for biodiversity, positive for ecosystems, and positive for local people and communities and cultures. The good news is there are lots of ways of getting all those win-wins. And if you're a glutton for punishment, if you go to there's the paper I flashed on the screen at the beginning of my presentation. The title of the paper is Natural Climate Solutions, published in 2017. That I was the first author of, along with a whole group of about 30 other scientists. If you Google that, it's free. There's no paywall. You can download it for free. And on the front page, there's a link to the supplemental materials. There's like about 100 pages of supplemental materials, and we talk through each of those 20 options and try to describe in more detail what those really mean. And there are also a bunch of resources on the natureforclimate.org link that give you some examples. So the answer is there are many ways of doing reforestation in positive ways. And the biggest example, the most extensive example, is through natural regeneration, is through letting systems recover. For example, to give you one example, there are very extensive areas in the Americas, and let's just take Brazil, for example, where you have vast areas that were cleared of native forests to put on some cattle, some cows for beef production. But many of those cases, the production of beef is very low. It's a very marginal production. There's really not much money being made off of that, very low food production. So not a whole lot of benefit for society in some of those places. And then over time, those soils get more degraded because the nutrients aren't cycled tightly by that sort of non-native grass system. So simply removing the cattle and halting the burn, what is often used to manage those landscapes is lighting fires and burning those grasses, which kill the trees. So just stopping that and letting the forest naturally regenerate, in many cases they will naturally regenerate back into a relatively diverse native forest. So those are the types of examples. And a lot of indigenous communities in places like Brazil are some of the key and primary defenders of those forests. So even just not having them converted in the first place is one of the biggest solutions.
Thank you, Bronson. Recognizing your time, I think I'm going to ask the final person who has their hand up to ask the question. Please be concise if possible, and then we will end the webinar. So C. Schiffman, you have your hand up.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, thank you very much for the interesting input in the conversation we have here. It's the first time that I'm participating in a webinar, so it's very interesting for me to see it. My name is Konrad Schiffman, and I'm forming part of a research group. It's called Sea Urban Water. And what we do is we dedicate ourselves to the implementation and investigation as well of nature-based solution in cities, mostly for the urban water management. And we do it here in Costa Rica, actually. So I have two quick questions to Dr. Griscom. The first one is why the cities are excluded from the mitigation potential. I've seen that you talk about forests and agriculture and grassland and wetlands. And are there also possibilities to see a potential in the cities as well? And the second would be if there are any data about it or frameworks which already work in this case and ask for the mitigation potential of cities. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic question. The simple answer is that, well, I guess there's probably no simple answer, but there are two answers I would give. One is that we did not actually exclude cities. Some of those options listed, of those 20 options, can occur in urban and suburban and rural environments. So in the case of reforestation, for example, that can be done in many landscapes. It can even be done in some urban landscapes where there are abandoned lots that could be where you can plant trees. And planting street trees is another example. So we didn't break out that as a distinct activity, but it would be sort of, think of that as sort of a sub-activity, right? Within reforestation, there are various different types of landscapes, across the spectrum from urban to rural, where, essentially adding trees back into landscapes can be done. We have a study that came out last year. Fargione, my colleague Joe Fargione, Fargione, I can try to send a link to that if I'll figure out how to do that. Fargione et al. It's called Natural Climate Solutions in the United States. And in that one, where we took a deeper dive, same approach as the global one, took a deeper dive for the United States. And in that one, because of the extent of both urban and suburban landscapes, is of significant extent in the US, we thought it was important to look at urban forestry specifically as its own pathway. So that's an example. So we look more carefully at the sort of urban opportunity there. So that's part one of my answer. The second part of my answer is that this whole story that I've been describing is what we would call, and forgive me for the getting really technical here, but we call supply side, right? So these are the things that you can do on the land to avoid the emissions of carbon or store more carbon. There's a whole nother dimension of this question, which is what we call the demand side. So diets, the consumption of food and fuel and fiber, wood, biofuels, food, all those things which involve the land, the use of the land. Those are the flip side of the coin of what's happening directly on the land. So in cities, whereas, yeah, there's some land that could be managed better, most of the story in cities is not really, is actually, the biggest part of that story is not about, it's not about the actual management of the land, just because globally the amount of land in cities is very much smaller than, let's say, in agricultural landscapes. The biggest part of the story is the behavior of the people in those cities, right? Because most people are in cities. And so human diets have are essentially the largest determinant of the land use in these rural areas. If people reduce the consumption of beef, which is the highest carbon footprint form of food, at least in terrestrial ecosystems like shrimp, there are other high impact food types, but for land, it's beef is the highest type. And so changing diets will have a huge potential benefit for allowing for things like reforestation, more trees in agricultural landscapes, etc. So cities have a massive role, but it's actually more on the demand side of all the natural climate solutions that we described.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for all of the questions. That's wonderful. We are so over time. Thank you, Dr. Griscom, for staying on the call. Thank you, Paul, for staying on the call. Thank you, everyone else. I'm just going to race through the couple of closing points that I have, and then I'm going to let you all go on with your very busy lives. So thank you to Dr. Griscom, Conservation International, for leading this webinar. It's really been so valuable to have you on. And Paul, thank you so much as well. Always so insightful. So just to give you an overview of this, this is a 3-part webinar series. The next part will be nature-based solutions policy. That is next Wednesday at 8 o'clock. So a little bit, about an hour ago, since we're so over time. Next Wednesday, November 20th at 8 Pacific Standard Time, which is 11 Eastern Standard Time, or 4 p.m. Universal Coordinated Time. And this will focus on international policy with speakers from 4SD, Wageningen University, as well as Instituto Socioambiental. And more details about that will be released on our social media, as well as everyone who registered for this webinar got sent a reminder email last night. And included in that email is also a registration link for the second webinar and for the third webinar. So moving forward, just a couple of housekeeping things. Youth for Nature, we're doing a lot right now. We're doing our webinar series, which is amazing. We're also doing storytelling, which I covered a little bit earlier, and we are currently accepting stories from youth around the world. If you have a story to share on nature and climate, please follow through to this link, and you can put yourself on this map that you see below. So this is outdated, actually. version of all of the stories that we've collected from youth around the world, and we try and give youth a platform to share their voice. And what we do is we share that through our digital story map, which you can see a screenshot of below, but we also share it at international conferences. With COP25 being a change of venue and up in the air, we are unsure of what side events are going to be continuing. We put in a couple proposals for some side events where we would feature some of these stories. And if you would like to be featured there, we really, really, really strongly encourage you to submit your story. If those don't go on, we are still pushing our story map out, and we will be trying to attend more conferences in the future. And your story is always so valuable, both digitally and on the ground, to really promote youth around the world who are working for nature and climate. So please share your story. And just a final one, please follow us. Obviously, you all know about Youth for Nature, but if you are not currently following us, please follow our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter. That's where you'll find the most up-to-date happenings of what we're doing, what resources we're sharing, and who we're connecting with. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you to our speakers, and I will let you go on this Wednesday. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.